Thank you, Mr. Meshram. When we talk in terms of localization of SDGs, I think you very well covered how fallback options, safety nets are available in the state, as well as how you are trying to skill and create jobs for people. Now our next speaker is Mr. Reddy from Ireland office.
Thank you very much, sir. I understand my comments largely should be related to the skill development because which is a common theme and a kind of all-pervasive kind of intervention that is required. As some of you know, Ireland FS Skill Development Corporation education clusters. I've been in the area of education, employability, employment generation initiatives on a PPP basis we work with. And as we speak, we reach out to almost 15 million students, youth, and industrial workers in about 250 districts. So given our experience on the skill development programs, my comments largely, as you said, sir, the solutions, I would try to provide my perspective about what needs to be done to make skill development a lot more inclusive, lot more acceptable, that would have impact on the SDG 1, 4, and several other things that we are talking about. Firstly, the limitations of current skill development programs as we look at it, it's largely supply driven. So every ministry, everybody would have a scheme, would have some provision, and therefore will have to do it. I think there is a need to look at demand side of it. They're also highly short term. And third is input oriented. And fourth is this inadequate integration with the formal academic systems. So given these, what could be done to make skill development programs to have significant impact on poverty reduction? Firstly, I think we need to look at skills beyond the current concept of need. When we are talking about skill development, we look at the target groups which are not in education, employment, and training. So essentially we wait for people to drop out of schools, colleges, being unemployed, then bring them and put them through some training program and say this is skill development, and then we link it with highly formal sector oriented. You have to produce 3 months of the point which RSLD's gentleman was saying, 3 months of pay slips, and pay slips will have to have PF, ESI, which means essentially entire skill development programs today are largely targeted, designed by default, is to meet the formal sector kind of requirements where the jobs do not account for significant. Therefore, what is that we need to do? I think firstly we need to look at skill development as a very essential tool for empowerment, inclusiveness, and capacity building of the poor, whether urban and rural. And if so, we need to adopt a lifelong learning approach, skills for life. Several of these advanced countries like UK, actually the whole concept is skills for life. And it starts from when you are inside the school, when you are out of the formal academic system, looking for jobs, and also while you are in workplace. So the skills need to be looked at. It can't be one short term, just booster, pick up the guy, put 45 days of training, put them in jobs. I think that we need to go beyond. While that may serve the immediate need of the country like India, where you have a large number of people who are unemployed, not in formal education system, that is required. We need to graduate that model, and we need to do it plus. What does it mean? Firstly, the schools, if you look at, there is a program of National Skills Qualification Framework, MHRD runs, where the skill development programs are embedded in the class 9th to 12th. But they need to be demand driven. Example being, why not we teach schools in tribal areas on the economic activities related to maybe honey related, or in case of Tripura where I come from, and in case of Tripura, why can't it be bamboo-centric value-added kind of program there? It being taught as a skill inside. In case of Lucknow, why can't it be chicken curry? Why should we actually bring the retail 1, 2, 3, 4, which is standard template designed at the city headquarters, and put them on one size fits all approach? I think we need to make it highly local, economic, activity-centric programs. If we can embed them in schools, I think from the day one, our students will start picking up schools. There is a big danger of, whatever they know, they will be uprooted. They do not know that. We train them for something where the jobs are uncertain in the wake of what we talk about, technology, lack of job creation, etc. So my first recommendation is that NSQF being done by Minister of HRD should be flexible, should allow the skills programs to be included in schools that will actually have close relationship with the economic activities of the neighborhood. And also the other the supply chain around that. Second, the agriculture, focus on agriculture related skills. We seem to have completely forgotten agriculture as a sector for skill development. And agriculture, I come from a rural area, we know we do a bit of work in my village in Andhra where we train the farmers on drip irrigation, on 1, 2, 3, 4, a lot of non-farm livelihood initiatives, even the farmer, actual farm work. And there's a huge scope and several eminent academicians sitting here, you know the importance of that, and probably we need to look at how do we actually do that. Formal extension system, agriculture department, conventional seem to be inadequate. It has not actually graduate to the next level. Skill development programs need to look at agriculture. There is a significant delta that can be added in terms of additional incomes as a result of direct intervention of skills. Third, we need to focus on non-farm livelihoods. Studies after studies indicate that today one of the main source of income for the people in the villages and in the towns are also non-farm. Largely in rural areas will non-farm. When I said non-farm, can we look at goatry? Can we look at poultry? Can we look at, there are large number of the models that are there which actually fit to the poor. You need not have a large scale 20 animal unit, 30 animal unit, there could be 3 animal dairy unit, there is stall fed goatry unit, meat consumption is going up. One of the important livelihoods, again back in my village or some of the villages I know where we are working, people just keep the goats and you actually fatten them for the purpose of meat consumption. And you know some of all of us like me, a classical Reddy who is a non-vegetarian, and we know how much we pay for the meat. And where is the supply? There is a mismatch between demand and supply. Why not we actually focus on skills that are required? Skills, when I say holistic, not just how to do it, it will be entrepreneurial skills 1, 2, 3, 4. I think non-farm livelihoods, whether it is NT, non-timber forest produce, to floriculture, to poultry, to dairy and goatry, many of them require things. In case of urban areas, large number of services like plumbing in our residential homes when the people come, or the roadside auto service technician, and beauticians who come in, all of them require to be skilled, upskilled, as a result of which, again, the additional incomes are likely to be accrued to them. Then the fifth point I would like to make is entrepreneurial skills. I think irrespective of the fact whether they're the poor and the poorest of the poor who live on the 100 rupees a day is also an entrepreneur. They know the survival skills, and can we actually add entrepreneurial skills an integral component of what NRLM does. Atul Dullu talked about various value chain programs, various activities, and actually probably we need to embed the financial skills, language skills, the technology related, and overall managerial kind of skill in appropriate manner. We need to look at as a part of the entrepreneurial skills being integrated into that. Then the next point is that to bring in the private sector to co-invest and deliver. For example, why can't we trust ITC and why can't we partner, government ministry can't partner with ITC on skills programs related to bamboo sector? Or why can't you partner with Dabur related to the honey collection? Like that, n number of corporates are there whose supply chains are dependent on the ability of the farmers and others to actually produce, collectivize and create those supply chains. But none of them will actually work if you do 15 inspections, as Atul Dillu's slide said. 15 inspections in a year, if you do, none of the private sectors will come. I think we need to create that framework where there's a co-investment, the trust, and then you operate. There are a large number of examples where some of these skills programs are successful. My personal experience of apparel sector, if you look at it, there are companies like Shahi is largest apparel export company in India, 150,000 people they employ. As a result of skill development program that they have been training and recruiting people from Odisha, then they realize so many people they are recruiting from Odisha for their factories in Delhi and Bangalore, they decide why not go back and set up factories in Odisha, because our apparel industry is labor intensive. Then now today there are 5,000 capacity apparel manufacturing units in Odisha are being set up by them. That's the power of skills. The moment the labor intensive sectors in some of these examples I took, if those employers are brought on board in design and delivery of the skills programs, probably the impact would be much, much better. And last point is that each economic activity specific, cluster specific skill development strategy is required. And instead of having one scheme and the same template being applied across the country, that will not work. The moment we actually decentralize it, from the way bottom-up approach we think, then skill development programs can be very, very effective in having positive impact on poverty reduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reddy, and you really added a lot of points, and one point which comes to my mind, and as a request to Mr. Shailendra, that if IRMA can undertake a study on cost-benefit analysis of inspectors. So you have inspectors, are they adding to prosperity, or are they coming in the way of prosperity? I think that, and it should be an independent study, not funded by Ministry of Labor or someone else. And I now request Mr. Krishna Kumar. He was Deputy Director General before his retirement in the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, now with RIS. He was the man who was handling indicators on SDGs.
Thank you, sir. Distinguished friends. See, today we are discussing the poverty, and that too under the framework of SDGs. Means that poverty should be linked to the sustainability issues. Today, most of the sectoral programs do not reflect the sustainability or preservation of the environment and building resilience type of things. If adequate attention is not paid to the environment conservation, because the poor mostly dependent on the environment resources, natural resources, there is always a danger that the people who are above the poverty line may fall below the poverty line over the period of time. I am a statistician. I was working on the indicator side. The next session, Mr. James Smith, who will be coming, and he will be discussing the national indicator and every other things, and he will provide you the details about the national indicator and its operationalization. But if you look at either at the global indicators list or the draft indicator list, what has been released by the MOSPI last March 17, they do not give adequate attention to the sustainability aspect of the poverty. Multidimensional poverty is all right. Multidimensional poverty in Indian context, what does it mean? It is yet to be defined. No indicator has been given. Sustainability issues, that Sendai framework, what the, natural targets, they have been, no data, no systematic collection is there. So there are these, inbuilt problem in the statistical system at present to measure the sustainability, how the sustainability affect the poverty and poverty affect the sustainability. That is not built in either in the global indicator or in the national indicator, what is at present it is. So my suggestion is that whenever we are formulating the indicator on poverty, that systematic programmatic approach to address the poverty, either through the direct measures or through the indirect measures, through income generation or through providing the basic services, there should be an inbuilt indicator on the basis of which we can assess whether the measures taken by the government are sustainable or not. That is my own suggestion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I recall that there was a discussion on indicators in the very first session today, and we do talk in terms of 232 indicators globally. I was just talking to my colleagues yesterday, and I said that if I have an indicator, a number of girls passing through, say, 12th board examination, as a proportion of number of boys passing through it. So that one indicator would cover gender equality, because it's inherently covering feticides. If a girl was not allowed to live, she cannot reach standard 12. And I am further encouraged by Mr. Reddy's talk that if we inbuild within our curriculum, we have, say, you have to acquire one skill before you clear 12th standard examination of a board. So that aspect is further refined. Not only she passes a board examination, she has skills, she has at least one skill also. So these are the kind of indicators which capture more things and can become like in national indicators which are under, I'm not talking in terms of the national indicators